On today's show, Tom Wilson and Logan Thompson help lift the Capitals in an ugly victory over the Islanders.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holmi. I've covered the Capitals for the past 4 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minute Cast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, I talk about the ugly victory over the Islanders. Yes, the Capitals did walk away from this game victorious, but it definitely could have gone the other way. A bit later, I'll talk about the other game over the weekend. That was the Capitals' victory over the Leafs. But just to get it going here, talking about the man himself, number 43, Tom Wilson, as he is absolutely torching it right now, leading the team in goals with 15 goals, and just making a statement that if you guys are not going to kick in the goal scoring production, I'm talking the forwards, then I am going to do it, as he puts up, count them, 2 goals against the Islanders. And the one goal in particular, well, both of them were nice, but the first goal, a power play goal, a goal where Alex Ovechkin shot it towards the net, and then Tom Wilson deflects it or tips it in. That was a great one because, well, we know that the Capitals don't score a lot of power play goals, right? And then the other one later in the game when Sorokin decided to play the puck behind the net and just kind of made the most of his opportunity. That Tom Wilson, engaged right now, is really getting it done. And when I'm talking about 15 goals, that is putting him as one of the best goal scorers in the National Hockey League now. So the detractors of my comments and what some people would say is not going well with Tom Wilson is he has put up 15 goals. That's really great, but a bit streaky, I guess you could say, as he will go stretches of games without scoring goals. That's the chatter that I hear from people that aren't Capitals fans. Like, yeah, he'll go score a goal here, he'll score a goal, 2 goals there, but then he'll go a pretty good stretch without scoring goals. And to that, at the end of the day, he still put up 15 goals. He's still one of the best goal scorers this season in the NHL. But let's dive into it here in the first segment and talking about number 43. Tom Wilson is the emotional engine of this team. And to be honest with you, when he's rolling, the Capitals follow like clockwork. And like I said, very apparent out there, and Team Canada on notice. Hey, your boys out there making, ready to make an impression for Canada, and just continues to keep getting a lot better. So let's start with the obvious. You don't go into Long Island, a building that has chewed up the Capitals alive before in recent years, and walk out with a commanding win unless your leaders are setting the tone. And Tom Wilson, well, he is definitely that kind of player, that he is a guy that plays with edge. He plays with physicality. He has leadership qualities to him. And he was the guy stirring the drink for the Capitals in the offensive department. And Tom Wilson in the game today in some matinee action definitely set the tone. 2 goals, a power play goal, heavy shifts, those long puck battles along the wall where he just refuses to lose. And, the thing of it is when you look at him, you think he would be very cocky, but, you listen to him in post-game interviews, he just sounds pretty humble about it, I guess I'm going to say. He doesn't sound too verbose like, yeah, that was pretty good. But what we're seeing from him, winning those puck battles, the leadership, the goal scoring, That's the stuff that matters. It's not just that, quote, Wilson had a good game, unquote, or it's, quote, the entire team fed off his pace, unquote. It's about him getting it done, because when Wilson plays, like we saw in the game this afternoon, the Capitals get swagger, they get confidence, and it kind of has Alex Ovechkin vibes that the team, the younger members on the team, and even the older ones, they look up to guys like Wilson and Ovechkin to get it done. And you saw that when he scored, the bench gets louder, and every single guy gets a little bit more confident. And I'll say this, the Islanders haven't exactly been giving up a ton of freebies this year. So for Wilson to go there and just dictate chunks of the game, that's leadership, that's presence, that's ultimately what got the Capitals to walk away from this game victorious. Because if you're just paying attention to the box score, final score 4-1, you think it was just a trouncing of the Islanders. Not the case. In the second segment, I'll talk about how this game could have definitely got out of hand. But Wilson, doing what he does best, helped lead this team. And like I talked about earlier in here, he is a guy that, doesn't get a lot of respect. I guess I'm going to say outside of DC markets. Like, I hate that guy. I hear that quite often. I'm still pretty proud to have his jersey hanging behind me in every podcast. And, but, like I say, the people outside of DC, I don't think they get him. I think that it's easy to hate a guy like him, but those very same, fans and the teams that they follow, if they found out that Tom Wilson joined their team, would be one of the first to go buy his jersey. But we know it, he is, right? It's obvious. He changes matchups, he changes tempo, and he changes how defenses behave. And also, like I talk about, sometimes he just has to skate in the vicinity of, a physical activity, and it disperses. That's oftentimes why I reference him as the sheriff of the team. Every time he's buzzing, the Capitals become a heavier, more dangerous hockey team. And that's ultimately, one of the reasons why the Capitals have won 4 games in a row. And it's not just him, it's Chychrun as well, right? It's Logan Thompson, it's Carlson, it's McMichael, the guys that have shown up as of late. And look, those goals that he scored were not cheap goals. They were skilled goals. The first goal, the tip-in, that took skill. Also, the goal that he scored when Sorokin was out of net, that was, that backhand shot, that requires some skill. And he even said he was impressed himself that he was able to find the back of the net in that one. But in any event, Tom Wilson just showing it up. And that's the version of Tom Wilson that pulls a team up in the standings. That it wasn't, just a couple of weeks ago, a few weeks ago, that I was coming to you guys talking about the Capitals being in last place in the Metro. And now look at where they're at. And honestly, with Ovechkin picking up secondary scoring, with Protas grabbing an empty netter, you could feel the lineup balancing, And I know that Protas was an empty netter, but in any event, we'll take them the way we can get them, right? And guys weren't pressing because Wilson was driving. He was the guy that was driving the scoring bus today for the Capitals. Has been Chychrun here as of late as well, but this is what we like to see. Goal scoring from different people, that it's nice that it's from one person, but when you can get more even scoring from multiple players, from multiple lines, that is what is assuring. And a team plays different when it's an emotional engine that's firing. And that is what was the case tonight. And that's what we got. Not just a Wilson game, a follow me Wilson game. And ultimately, like I say, what ended up putting the Capitals in the win column. That's what we want to see. A whole lot more of that as the Capitals head out west here against some really great opponents there as well. They're going to need Wilson. They're going to need Chychrun and these kind of guys to show up if they want to keep rolling. All right, so coming up here after the break, I'll talk about the ugly victory over the Islanders. Listen, it's not often that you reference a victory as ugly, but this game could have definitely gone the other way. I'll break it all down straight ahead. When I'm hydrated, everything just works better. My focus, energy, mood, even my skin. That's why I've been using Drip Drop. It's a doctor developed hydration that keeps me running at full power no matter what my day looks like. Drip Drop isn't your average sports drink, it delivers 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of leading brands using a science backed formula trusted by a medical professional, firefighters, and over 90% of top collagen proteins. I like using Drip Drop as a part of my daily routine. I'll mix a packet in the morning before I hit the gym and during a midday slump, and that's what I think you're going to like about it as well. Be the best version of yourself. So before you start your day, before you start going to work or the gym, drop down some Drip Drop and you'll feel that much better and you'll feel that much more hydrated. So right now, Drip Drop is offering podcast listeners 20% off your first order. Go to dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL for 20% off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard and keep your body and mind performing at their best with Drip Drop. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I want to thank all of you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in the second segment here, we're talking about the game today and some matinee action against the Islanders. And like I alluded to in the first segment, if you're just looking at the box score, you think that that was a handily won game. I'm here to tell you it's not the case. Logan Thompson really had it thrown to him. The kitchen sink was thrown directly at him. And luckily for the Capitals, he was able to throw that back at the Islanders because, like Logan was talking about in this game, a few games or so ago, that he allowed a bunch of goals on not a lot of shots, and that got him the hook. He faced something similar in the game today against the Islanders, but into the game today, he stood tall. Spencer Carbery talked about as well, the odd man breaks, that, it's good to feel confident about the win, talking Tom Wilson and Logan Thompson, these kind of guys playing huge, but certain things need to get cleaned up. It's, one thing to watch a game and just be like, yeah, we won, and just let's concentrate on the positive. And that's good. I want to do that. I don't want to be the guy to hang out in the doldrums here. But what I'm saying is that there's certain things that need to get cleaned up, because at some point things are going to go the other way. But let's just dive into that here in the second segment here, talking about the game and talking about how this game at point favored the Islanders, out shooting the Capitals 31-18. And those are sometimes the things that can make the difference. But Wilson, like I say, was the guy, but Bo Horvat scores on that power play goal. And ultimately, that was a moment that I thought maybe the momentum could have been starting to go in their direction. But let's get into it here, because the Caps are learning how to win, even when they're not at their best. And those wins are worth their weight in gold later in the season, because they're not always going to be a master class of execution. The power play is not always going to be dialed in. The PK, sometimes you're going to miss passes. Sometimes you're going to cough up a puck. If you can walk away from those kind of games victorious, that's a good feeling. Should you have put yourself in that bad position? No, but you're able to correct what was wrong. The Capitals collective, the roster, and Spencer Carbery were able to figure it out. So here's the truth. This win on Long Island, not pretty for stretches. And I think that's true when you watch the game. Not smooth, not polish. And the Caps went over 13 minutes, 13 without a shot. On the road against a structured team can oftentimes not fare too well for you. And that's the kind of lull that can sink you. And earlier this season, it did sink the Capitals in games just like this. And there was some chippiness there, right? That you saw Schaefer and Leonard mixing it up out there. And I like that, and there was no one like stepping in, like protect our guy, because there was two young guys mixing it up. But and that's the kind of thing that kind of just really gets the juices going when you're watching these kind of games. But something is different around the Capitals right now. I'm not talking about the Capitals to start the season. We know that they struggled, right? And they struggled to win games. But something is different within this team right now, at least in this somewhat recent moment here. Because the guys out in the game tonight didn't panic, and the team didn't fold. They didn't start trading chances. They leaned on Logan Thompson, and Thompson delivered. The thing of it, of course, is that we cannot lean all the time on Logan Thompson. In this game, he saved like 30 of 31. That's a lot of saves. He faced a lot of pressure, and he stood tall. And ultimately, at the end of the day, he bailed the Capitals out. He gave them breathing room, like, you're not generating offense. I'm going to do what I can do to keep us in this game. And ultimately gave the Capitals a chance to recover, which is exactly what good NHL goalies do during these inevitable rough stretches. And I say rough stretches, yes, they won the game. Good. But definitely things where they really put the pressure on LT. And then what we watched in the game is the team slowly woke back up and clawed their way back into rhythm. The fight or flight and kind of shaking up the snow globe kind of put them off their path. They were able to return to the form that got them winning these games. And that's the difference. Not goals, not the box score, but it's more about mentality. Are you mentally tough? When you're facing adversity, are you going to fold, or are you going to batten down the hatches mentally and figure it out? And you know how many NHL teams just collapse after a sloppy 10-minute stretch? A lot of teams. And, subsequently why those teams are struggling. But instead of spiraling, the Capitals stabilized. They managed the puck better. They tightened the neutral zone, and they won board battles in a row. And that's why they're in the position that they're in right now, making it very interesting in the Metro, on Carolina, on New Jersey, that don't get too comfortable, because the Capitals are here and very well could supplant both of those teams. But that's the thing. They did the things that worked well. They stabilized, and then boom, the dam breaks. Wilson scores, then scores again. Then, in OT, and then empty net action there, Ovi and Protas get it done there as well. So those are the things that we like in these kind of games, is just the team willing to dig deep and getting goals no matter how you get them. It doesn't matter. So if they're empty netters, I don't want them to be viewed as a negative or a pejorative. They're goals. They're good goals, as they say. And winning ugly isn't a flaw. It is a feature of a good team. Of course, that would be something different that I would be talking to you about had they lost this game. But it was the ability of this team to dig deep to get it done. Because the reality of it is here, as we go along the season, if you want to make the playoffs, if you want to survive late in the season, you have to win games exactly like the ones that we saw this afternoon. That, if you just paid attention to the on-ice activity, you might think that this game's going off the rails. And at times it really did feel like it. But like I said, it was the ability of this team to figure it out later in the game that really put him in the win column. Because, games where the details aren't perfect, and, when you're tired and you don't have your legs, that's when you need to dig deep. It shows maturity, structure, and it shows growth within this roster. Maybe gaining chemistry, that you're missing, some key assets, some key players, but you're still able to get it done. And even more than any of what I'm talking about in this segment is just that when you heard that Pierre-Luc Dubois was out and Nick Dowd was out, that we thought, well, this is it. That Chris Patrick is going to have to go out and do something crazy, or we're going to have to call someone up from Hershey. And that still might be the case. Just considering what Ilya Protas is doing in Hershey, he's like, I cannot be denied, guys. Look at me right now. But, they're getting it done, and they're getting it done without, like I said, two big players. And this team is ultimately learning how to weather storms instead of being swallowed by them. And honestly, that's the foundation of a team starting to believe in itself. And at this point, I think kind of dangerous, right? And there's no fear anymore. And when I say that, people are going to be like, well, what do you think they're going to win the rest of the games? I don't. But what I do know is I think this team is in a better position now that, say they lose a game on the West Coast trip, that it's not going to be, back-to-back losses after that. That we lost this game, we lost to the Kings. Now we're going to lose the next two. It doesn't necessarily have to be the case. I think this team is finally clicking. It took a bit, right? But up to about the Thanksgiving break for this team to get its sea legs underneath it, so to speak. But they're finally figuring it out. And as a Capitals fan, and as the players and the coaches, that has to be a very reassuring feeling. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about the game against the Leafs and that awkward moment when Kelly Sutherland says, I owe you guys one. What was that all about? I'll discuss next. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting from FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets on action as it unfolds, every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is at its best when it starts to shift, a receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips from a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment. Live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up. You can bet next on touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps track of every snap, every drive, and every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action like I do on any given Sunday, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube, like the videos, and comment anything down below. So in the final segment here, I'm talking about the Capitals game versus the Leafs, and, well, another game where the Capitals had to dig deep as they faced quite a bit of adversity against a Leafs team that, let's be honest, is not playing some of their best hockey. The Capitals didn't just beat the Maple Leafs. They overcame a bad break, leaned on depth, and rode Jacob Chychrun, the heater, to a 4-2 comeback win that tells you a lot about where this team is headed. Again, this was a game that was played before, but let's get into it because this one had everything: drama, a blown whistle, a hot mic, a comeback, and a defenseman who's been playing like he's got fire in his skates. And of course, we know that goal streak was snapped. He did not score a goal in the game today, but Chychrun, man, in the game and that streak, I mean, what else can you even say anymore? 5 straight games with a goal, a 10-game point streak, and the game winner in the game against the Leafs. An absolute ripper with under 4 minutes left. That's not luck. That's not fluky. That's a guy who's in complete control of his game. And like I've talked about before about Chychrun, is in the blue line, it's a luxury, when you can have guys chip in on the blue line and get that kind of production. And Chychrun, on that point streak was something. And defenseman is finishing like a top line winger. Teams have to change how they defend. That's impact. And that's the impact that he has. And because you take a look at it, that was a game that we thought there was a goal, but it was actually not a goal. Dylan Strome scores, or thought he scored, or actually did score, but the official blew it dead early. And the net was off the moorings. Players are in mid-celebration. Ultimately, the fans are confused, and then it's just no goal. You could feel the energy get sucked out of the building. And then to, add insult to injury, on an open mic, a hot mic, if you will, Kelly Sutherland gets caught saying, quote, "I owe you one," unquote. An acknowledgement that, hey, I screwed it up and I'm going to try to make this right. And what happened is they're like, "Hey, buddy, you blew the whistle. You gotta stand by this. We can't undo a whistle blow." So that's ultimately what led to that awkward moment. And when officiating is being undermined, not just in the NHL, in Major League Baseball, and a lot of different sports, to have a referee be so candid in saying, "I made a mistake. I owe you one," that just doesn't cut it, because we heard that. Everybody heard that. You can't say that to a team you just took a goal away from. That's like officiating a version of "my bad," but also too late. And it was messy. And Caps fans, we're going to remember that one. And I think that it just kind of gives, a black eye to more officiating. Like we say, the Major League Baseball, I think, gets it the worst because of balls and strikes. The NFL is definitely in there as well. I see it in the NBA a fair amount as well. But here's, what I give the Capitals credit for. They didn't spiral after that. They didn't let the Leafs build a 3-goal lead. They didn't mope. They responded. And Connor McMichael, a guy who's been showing up, a guy that put up 14 goals getting for the dirty, greasy areas. Well, that's what he's on a mission to try to rekindle who he was last season. And, love what he's doing lately. It gets the Capitals on the board with a hardworking second effort goal. That's the kind of play that says we're not going away. And honestly, when you got guys like Connor McMichael, Chychrun, Wilson, that all of a sudden you have multi-tier scoring that makes it that much more difficult to defend, right? I just quick go back to the game against the Islanders. Everyone thought that Ovechkin was going to shoot that, but then it goes to Tom Wilson and he deflects it in. So it definitely is changing perceptions and how they try to defend this team. In that game, Beauvillier ties it up in the third on that feed from Ovi. That felt like a turning point in that entire game. Ultimately not glamorous. It wasn't a highlight reel goal, but it counted for a goal on the board. That's what it's all about. I don't care if they're pretty, if they're downright ugly, if they can find the back of the net. And that is ultimately what they were able to do in that game. But you take a look at the game against the Leafs. The Capitals out shooting the Leafs 34 to 22. But, there was a lot of offensive production. And, with that first goal getting knocked off, that Toronto was quick to try to make the most of it. As in the first period, Morgan Riley scores a goal. Second period, Matthew Nyes. And then in the third period, it was all Capitals, Beauvillier, Chychrun, Wilson. That's why the Capitals are in this position. That even when they get a black eye, like Kelly Sutherland saying, "Hey, sorry guys, that probably should have been a goal, but I had a whistle and I blew it and my bad," that they were able to not let that mind game, get in their head and, let it overcome them. They ultimately found a way to walk away from that game victorious. And, both games, not pretty games, games that could have definitely gone the other way. You take a look at the Maple Leafs game, that could have definitely gone to the Leafs. And the game that we saw this afternoon against the Islanders, again. And that's what I talked about in the first segment, or the second segment, rather, is these ugly victories, not pretty games, but still winning. And that's what I want all of you to circle out there is sometimes they're not pretty games, but you walk away winning. And sometimes I think that speaks more volumes than just going out and just shellacking a team 4-0, 5-0, something like that, where it's just an all out stomping of a team. That there was adversity. I'm concentrating on these last two games from the Maple Leafs and from the Islanders, but still finding a way to get it done. And that is the big moments that make it that much more exciting when you're covering this team, is that it finally seems, even we're, kind of just right past the Thanksgiving marker here, that this team is finally figuring it out. Let's hope let's really hope they can keep that going forward as they have a tough schedule, a late schedule, as they are playing on the left coast, as they say, for the next few games. Let's hope they can just keep it going and the Capitals can continue to keep climbing the standings. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. Now, for your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holmi, and I'll talk to you again next time.